before we start, just to see if there are any questions about the practice so far. People have got a handle on what they're doing or anything that could do with a bit more clarification. Don't be shy. Does Badger get to ask questions? What do people think? Go on, Badger.
Well, it's just one that...
oh, sorry, I'm supposed to do the raise me hand.
Let's have Badger first, and then Naraviro will look after the raised hands.
Thanks. No, it's just really... I'm just aware that within the text, this term awareness isn't actually used, yet we're in discussion and talking about what we're doing. There's a lot of reference to awareness. I'm just wondering where that term fits in. And
there are, I have to do this a little bit from memory. But in both the Anapanasati suttas and in the Satipatthana sutta, sati hardly ever gets mentioned. And the Satipatthana sutta gets mentioned in the refrain that we are mindful and clearly comprehending. So you've got sati sampajanya as a pair. And in the Anapanasati sutta, it's sort of similar, that you get sati right at the start, and then it doesn't get repeated. And however, there are a number of different terms that suggest different qualities of awareness. So for example, in the text on Vedana, the word that's used, the word that gets translated as sensitive to or experiencing is something like, I can't, sorry, I don't remember the exact Pali, but it's the same root as Vedana. And it means to have a visceral sense of the experience of feelings. In the section on wisdom, which comes next, the word is anupassana, I think. So you get sort of kayanupassana, vedanupassana. And what that means is a sustained attention to. So all the way through the sutta, all the way through both suttas, you get kind of different aspects of awareness. So you get the kind of the more analytical aspect of knowing something or understanding something. You get the sense of a kind of sustained inquiry or a sustained attention to. You get the sense of a kind of visceral felt sense of what your experience is. And it changes a bit according to the context. Something that Analayo suggests is that sati isn't something that might not be something that you actually do. It's the sort of quality of receptive awareness that comes from the specific activities. So if you're paying attention to the breath, you've got a gut feeling for the Vedana, you've got a more kind of clear, attentive attention to mental states, and you've got this sustained awareness of the impermanence of experience. The sum total of that is this alive, receptive availability to experience. But it's an important point, I think, Badra, that sort of sati's there, but it's not there as a description of how we actively engage with experience, that the active engagement has sort of different aspects and different dimensions to it.
Thank you. helpful, just to draw all those different qualities together. Thank you.
Srinivasi, did you want to ask something?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, somebody brought up in my group this morning was like about where you focus on the breath in the body, and I know it's something that Larry Rosenberg talked about in Breath by Breath. So I just wondered if you had any particular thoughts on that.
I'd probably go with the pragmatic school, which is what lets you make the connection to it. And I think there are so many different traditional instructions, from the point of the nose, the upper lip, the throat, the chest, the belly, the whole body. And for me, the sort of point is that you want a sustained quality of engagement with the experience of breathing. So whatever gives you access to that sustained engagement with the experience of breathing is what I would go with. In the 4-stage mindfulness of breathing, obviously you've got that instruction to concentrate on the point of the nose, or where the sort of breath first touches the body. And I think the point of that particular instruction is that it's kind of hinting at dhyana practice. So it's looking for that quality of the mind starting to become one-pointed. So it's looking for a kind of focused point of attention. But I think the Anapanasati structure gives you a number of different doorways into that sort of deeper dhyanic experience. You know, the fact that in the first and second stages, you've got this sort of curiosity about the breath, and then you're staying with the duration of the breath. So that gives you the vitaka and vichara elements. You've got the first two dhyana factors. Then in the piti and sukha, you're attending to the next two dhyana factors. And then in that attending to mental activities, but doing it from the stable, you know, kind of grounded, connected awareness that's not getting involved, you've got upekkha, so you've got the fifth of the dhyana factors. And I think because you've got those different points of access to dhyana, that kind of focus on the single point of sensation isn't the only doorway that the structure gives you. So I think you can be more flexible about how you connect with the breath itself. And again, I just go back to what works, what gives you that living sense of breathing in and breathing out. Does that make sense, Sally? Does that answer the question?
Yeah, thank you.
Does that give you something to work with, like in your own practice? Would that work as a way of approaching the breath, do you think?
Well, I think I tend to work more intuitively with that, like you say, in what's working, or and often I start with a sense of breathing with the whole body, because then I start to notice where actually my attention is, if my attention is drawn more to a particular part of the body. So yeah.
No, I think.
But somebody in my group, somebody in my group this morning was talking about, you know, another Triratna teacher talking about kind of breathing through the feet, you know, kind of, which is a bit more of a departure.
It's a slightly harder instruction to carry out for some people, probably. But.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
There's something sort of metaphorical in that, isn't there, about the whole body being involved in the the experience of the breathing, so you can kind of see what it's getting at. And the only thing I would say is that I think definitely in the practice, you're working with different kinds of awareness, and I think there's a kind of, like that thing about the attention to the tip of the nose. There's something in that as a support for quite focused awareness, and then there's something in the whole breathing body that's a support for quite broad awareness. And I think in the practice, at some point, you want to be getting familiar both with the focus and with the breadth. I think they kind of do different jobs in our availability to experience. So the only thing I would say was at some point, don't engage in a way that doesn't allow for that kind of focus.
Yeah, and I mean, I suppose my experience when I first started to meditate was I was trying to do the focus too quickly, so which just gave me a headache. It was like, because I was trying to do it. So now that's what, if I notice that I start to try and bring more one-pointedness, I know that I'll just start to get tension in my forehead if actually I'm trying to do it too quickly. So then I just have to kind of broaden out again. Yeah. And and keep, it's almost like it's like a wave keeping on trying to sort of go back to, and then I'll know when I'm ready, because I'll be free from that level of kind of tension.
I think that's good, and the sort of focus isn't something that you're imposing on your experience. It's something that naturally comes as you get more interested in and more engaged in. No, good, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions about the practice?
Yep, Vimravadri.
Thanks, Naravira. Yeah, I think I've been approaching the Anapanasati practice as by kind of using the breath as an anchor, a sort of stabilizing factor from which to investigate other parts of my experience. So there might be there's a sort of anchoring focus, if my mind's fairly sort of collected on the breath. But then there's also, there can be a breadth of focus that would take in other aspects, I suppose, like Vedana and mental objects and so on. And whereas I've been thinking in terms of the sort of one-pointedness and absorption, I've been thinking of that as a different practice in a way. So what I mean is, if it hasn't happened in this particular retreat, but if my mind were sort of inclined to go, very much into absorption, and there's a lot of sukha, there's a lot of joy, there's that sort of permeation, I'd be going into something different, in the sense that in there's not much of a sense of sort of contemplation. In the there's not, I'm not contemplating arising and passing. I'm not bringing in the satipatthanas, as it were. So I'm wondering whether I've sort of I'm quite understanding the Anapanasati practice, because I'm kind of seeing it as kind of like satipatthana, only with an anchoring in the breath, if you know what I mean. Yeah. But I'm not sure whether it sort of shades into dhyana practice.
I'd read it a little bit differently from that. I must say, I mean, that's a wee bit my own bias in the practice. But I mean, like when we studied at the mind section, traditionally, certainly the Satipatthana Sutta, but I would say the Anapanasati Sutta certainly includes dhyana. I mean, you've got the dhyana factors there so explicitly. And I think you're making a sort of choice as you go about where your attention goes. And I think, that the traditional relationship between dhyana and reflective practice is that dhyana creates the depth and creates the integration that allows the engagement with sort of wisdom practice and insight practice to go more deeply. And I think I would say if we go too quickly to the reflective practice, it can be a bit superficial. The whole psyche's not involved. So I think what you're doing in the early stages of Anapanasati, this sort of engagement with the body, the breath, the feelings, it's a kind of process of psychic integration. And to be honest, I would probably read the mind section as like definitely a legitimate reading of it is as dhyana practice. It's that natural shift from awareness of the sense experience into the to use the technical language, from kamaloka to rupaloka. So you've got that shift into a much deeper, more integrated, more intense experience of the energies of the mind. And then you go from there to the reflective practice. And I think to make a choice, like sometimes you'll choose to go to the reflective practice. Sometimes you'll sit in that stage of absorption and then go to the reflective practice. But the structure of the practice is flexible enough to allow all of those as explorations. And I would say at some point you want to do the kind of the deeper samatha practice as part of the integrated engagement with the reflective practice.
Thanks, Dhammarati. That's really helpful.
But does that make sense? Does that sort of, yeah?
Yeah, it does make sense. Yeah.
Any questions not from order members?
No one else at the moment, Dhammarati.
Okay, great. It sounds like everybody else is better trained. It's only us in the order that are trying to figure out what we're doing with some of this stuff. Right, let's have a look at this mind section, because I think it does have a bearing on this. So we're on the mind section. Let me just find my place. So in the notes, this would be, excuse me, page 7 of the 14-page document that you've got. And what the text says is, and how, monks, does one in regard to the mind abide contemplating the mind? I read this morning. Here one knows a lustful mind to be lustful. It's an interesting choice of adjectives from Analio here. And a mind without lust to be without lust. One knows an angry mind to be angry, a mind without anger to be without anger. One knows a deluded mind to be deluded, and a mind without delusion to be without delusion. And then a kind of separate section, one knows a contracted mind to be contracted, a distracted mind to be distracted. One knows a great mind to be great, a narrow mind to be narrow, a surpassable mind to be surpassable, an unsurpassable mind to be unsurpassable, a concentrated mind to be concentrated, an unconcentrated mind to be unconcentrated, a liberated mind to be liberated, and an unliberated mind to be unliberated. So that's the instruction in this section. What was the best way to let me give you a little bit of Pali, actually. Lustful, the word that's being translated as lustful or without lust, if I can just find it. Lustful is saragam, R-A-J-A-M. So saragam means with raga. And without lust means the Pali is vita ragam. And again, the sort of raga is the middle of it, and vita raga is without raga. And one of the things, I like this word raga, you get it again later You get it in 6 element practice. But raga means passionate attachment. So you get this sense of the mind passionately holding on to something. So to me, lust is a wee bit moralistic. Raga, in this sense of passionate attachment, for me is a bit more psychologically descriptive. You get a little bit more of a strong sense of what the mind is doing with raga. So that the Pali here is saying the mind with raga, knowing the mind with raga, and then knowing the mind without raga. A mind that's angry and a mind without angry is sadosam and vita dosam. So the word in the middle there is dosa, and dosa usually means hatred, actually, but you know, it's the root aversive poison. It's the kind of fundamental tendency of the mind to protect itself from threatening experience. So it's this hardwired life or death pushing away of what threatens us. So what's being looked at here is the mind with dosa or without dosa. And the deluded mind or not deluded mind is, I've written this down, sa, I think, moham and vita moham. And that the core word is moha, and moha just means you haven't got a clue. It's just this real misunderstanding, misconstruing the nature of our experience. We're not clear about our own experience. We're not clear what's going on round about us. So like traditionally, they're the 3 roots, they're the 3 core defilements of the mind. And all of the other negative emotions, if you look at books like Know Your Mind, Mind in Harmony, that they're all just elaborations of derivations of these core 3 unskillful roots. So what you're starting to attend to in becoming aware of the mind is these strong habitual egocentric relationships to experience, and then starting to get a sense of what the mind is like in their absence, or like I was saying this morning, what the mind is like when the positive qualities that are revealed or are developed, when those strong habits are a bit in abeyance. So you're starting to look at the quality of the experience. And again, looking at quite central habitual ways that we relate to our experience. We pull towards, we push away, or we kind of hide. We don't want to look clearly at what our experience is. It's the kind of head in the sand strategy for protecting our self-identity. We're just not quite looking at the facts of our experience. So that's what's being got at here. Partly to break up the rhythm a little bit, partly so you're not listening to me for hours on end. One of the things that's kind of recommended is that there's a bit of an experiential exploration of those. And in a way, it's stuff that we know. It's not going to come as a big surprise to you what raga feels like, or what contentment feels like. But I still think it would be worthwhile just doing a little bit of an exploration. But one of the things that's being said in practice is that passionate attachment doesn't serve you, and letting go serves you better. Hatred doesn't serve you, and love serves you better. But it's almost like, as Bhante says somewhere, you've got to find emotional equivalents for intellectual understanding. I think almost you've got to find visceral equivalents for intellectual understanding. So what I was going to suggest is that we take 10 minutes and just reflect a little bit, just bring to mind a time when there's been a strong experience of attachment, strong experience of aversion, what does it feel like in your body? What does it feel like in your feelings? What does your mind do in that experience? And then just bring into mind an experience of openness, of contentment, an experience of love. What does it feel like in our body? What does it feel like in our feelings? What's the flavour of mind? So what I was going to suggest, if you're up for it, is just we do a little bit of investigation. Spend, say, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, just getting a feel for these experiences. And then what I'm going to suggest is just that we spend 5 minutes, 10 minutes in pairs and just describe it. In a way, just in the articulating of it, you connect with it a wee bit more clearly and a wee bit more conceptually. People up for doing that? Great. So gird up your loins. It means I'm going to intentionally ask you to look at some unpleasant experience, but we get to go to the skillful stuff as well. So this will test your upeka. So again, just connecting back to body on the cushion. That lovely description of using the breath as an anchor, using the breath as a way of connecting us to the experience. Just connecting to the breath. Using the breath as a way of connecting us to the body. Just breathing in to our body right now. Just reminding ourselves what mindfulness feels like. Getting a sense of the flavour, of the texture, of what it's like to be present to your experience. Then if you don't mind, just bringing to mind for a moment a time when we've felt some level of ill will towards somebody else. And just choose your own example, choose an intensity of it that you feel comfortable with. Again, please forgive me, but just making it as vivid as we can. What did that situation look like? What was being said? Even if you can, get a sense of how that felt in your body. What's the taste of it? What's the texture of it? What's that felt sense in our body when we feel ill will towards someone else? And just shifting attention to our feelings. What does it feel like? What's our heart like? What's the mental state like? What does it feel like in our minds? What's the quality of the awareness? And just a couple of deep breaths to connect us back to our experience right now. Even a couple of deep exhalations, just letting go of how that felt. And bringing to mind, if we can, a time when we've felt appreciation for somebody, affection for somebody, love for somebody. Again, making that as concrete as we can, not just an abstract idea, but specifically what was happening. What did it look like? What did it sound like? Okay, just noticing if we can get a feel for what that's like in our body. What's the texture of it? What's the flavour of it? Moving attention to our feelings. What does it feel like? What's our heart like? What's the quality of the awareness like when you feel that kind of appreciation or goodwill? Again, just sitting for a moment with the breath, sitting for a moment with our present experience. And bringing to mind when there's been a strong experience of wanting, or at least some experience of wanting, some experience of raga, this idea of attachment. Getting a sense again of what it feels like in our body. And our feelings themselves. What does it feel like? What's our heart like? Again, just the quality of awareness when we're in that state of mind. What's that like? Just thinking, let's not be too judgmental about the mental state, just bringing a little bit of empathy and equanimity. Somewhere in there, a sort of need for security and need for wholeness, trying to be met in a way that's maybe not going to work. A little bit of empathy for it. And bringing to mind a time when we've felt contented, when we've felt appreciative. I was walking around the garden this morning in the sunshine. It's quite a heart-opening experience. Bringing to mind a time where we felt aware of something in an appreciative, non-grasping way. A sense of that in our body. Sense of that in our heart. What's the quality of awareness in that state of mind? And just coming back into the room. Breathing back into our experience right now. Any lessons learned about a quality of attention that we can bring to what we're doing right now? And I'd still like to suggest, let's go into pairs and just describe it. Now, again, I'm guessing there might not be a lot of surprises, but just even trying to stay a little bit connected to the experience. So even kind of speak in the present tense. What's it like in your body? What does it feel like? What's the quality of the mental state? And maybe just pick one of the positives and one of the negatives and describe the two. And then we can switch partners. So maybe I'd start with the negatives, describe one of the negatives and the contrasting positive, and just describe what that's like. If you get time to go into a second example, then do. So we'll spend 10 minutes doing that. So 5 minutes for each partner. And then let's come back into the room. So a little Tetris in the, as it were, the contracted states and the more skillful states. What were they like? Let's just have a word or two that catches the flavour of them.
Oh, I could speak, but I can't find the hand.
Yeah, go on. Whoever you are.
I just,
Go ahead, Simon.
we concluded that the extremities, that the hates and the passionate loves erode away over time, but the positivity, the positive conditions continue and get reinforced. And I could, like Damarati, you experienced something this morning, or where you went walk around the garden, but that was an extension probably of something you experienced last week or last year. You've got this positivity within you, which you keep taking with you, but hates, in our case, hates and loves, passionate, were too painful to be kept alive. So we have to research into the archives to get the emotions that went with that. And they don't continue really. You don't repeat it. Yeah. I'll let somebody else speak.
Another couple of descriptions.
Kath?
Hi. I think what I noticed that sort of surprised me a bit was that with the angry or irritated, I didn't want to have any contact with that person. You know, I sort of wanted to cut myself off. And then with the gratitude, or that I really wanted to connect with them.
Yeah. So cut off versus connected.
Yeah.
I guess that would resonate with another couple of people. Any other contrasts? So we've got transient and more sustained. We've got cut off and connected. Let's have a couple more.
I'm sure there's somebody out there. Be bold. Okay, Amanda.
What I noticed was how much heavier my body was when I was, re-experiencing being rejected and feeling like heavy-hearted and hollow inside, that hollowness. But it wasn't a nice, when it's positive, you feel light. I felt light. I could feel my heart just light like a feather, or even a slight palpitation, looking at a beautiful view that I came across suddenly, and the joy. Whereas this kind of sense of that sort of betrayal almost, and feeling it in your body as hollow, and almost like a pulling, that sort of sense of pulling to try and fill that place, and also that thing about not having a clue and just wanting to run away and just not have to deal with it.
So we've got transient, we've got cut off, we've got heavy, we've got hollow versus light, connected, contented, sustained. Get some nice contrast. Maybe one more, then let's have a break.
Frank.
Yes. What about quality of awareness? Anything in there? Anything you noticed about what happens to your awareness in those contrasting states?
I found that it was much the same in physical and emotional and awareness, that there was a tremendous narrowing of awareness.
Yeah.
When I came back into the present moment at the end of that one, I was suddenly aware that, there's so much around me. And by contrast, before that, I was very, very, very narrowly focused in my attention.
Yeah.
My mind wasn't really engaged with anything other than that one tiny thing.
Yeah.
It was very, very closed.
Yeah.
I had an image of having built a fortress all around me and was hiding inside it so that nothing could get in.
Yeah. Great, nice metaphor. And again, we're sort of stating the obvious here, but what we're trying to do in practice is just this. You get the theory that craving leads to dukkha. And what we're describing right now, that cut-offness, that emptiness, that hollowness, that heaviness, every time that mental state comes up, that's the flavour of the experience. And every time we're acting out of awareness and acting out of emotional positivity, kindness, the still, connected light, the other descriptions that people were using. It's the Dhammapada thing, isn't it? An unskillful mental state. Shadow follows us like the cart following the ox. Skillful mental state. Happiness as close as a shadow. And it's not a hard idea to get, but it's almost like starting to get a feel for every time what was this point again, that it's not random. These experiences arise in dependence on conditions. And what we're starting to do with practices like Anapanasati, practices like the Brahma Viharas, is we're setting up the conditions that liberate us from sorrow. And the more viscerally we understand that, the more energy starts to move towards those liberating states of mind. So what we're doing in this inquiry in the Satipatthana Sutta is we're just starting to notice the flavour, the texture, the contraction of the dukkha, and the sort of the joy, the lightness, the connection, the liberation of the positive mental states. And that the skill is, what Naravira was saying during the break, we can get lost in the complexity of the mental states themselves. But if you come back to the emotional tone of them, you can feel that move into contraction and disturbance. You can feel that move into releasing and relaxing. And if you start to get a feel for the emotional tone of it, it gets you below the complexity of the mental state, and it gives you a clue back to the breath, back to the body, back to the spaciousness, back to the attention. You've already got the tools that support that move into something more liberated. And at that point, that might not be a bad time to have some tea. So little break for 10 minutes. And the word for knowing is pajanati. And I haven't had time to look up the etymology of it, but I'm guessing that the jhana part of it is from the same root as jnana. And I think pa is an emphatic. I'll check that, I wouldn't swear to it, but it's that kind of, kind of clear seeing of something. So let's just have a quick look. We don't have long, but the second part of the text, just a sort of general point to make, and going back to this thing about sati sampajanya, and sati is this element of connecting to the experience, a sort of receptive awareness of what's happening. But the sampajanya is much more directional. It's clear about, it's about how we're responding to what we're experiencing. So it's got this sort of, again, Bounty talking about it as continuity of purpose or sense of purpose. And basically the sampajanya part of it is in these contrasts, once we know what the state of mind is, what moves us towards being caught and what moves us towards being liberated. So it's the mind starting to explore or recognize the conditions that support that unfolding process of growth. So that's the sampajanya part of it. And in a sense, that's the point of making these comparisons. You're getting a feel for the two options that are open to the mind. You've got the cyclic nidanas, you've got the spiral nidanas, you've got the move towards confusion, the move towards awareness, and it's the mind gradually learning to align itself with the current that leads in the direction of liberation. So you've got another set of contrasts in the second half. You've got the contracted mind. You know a contracted mind to be contracted, distracted mind to be distracted. So one is that the mind's tightening up and narrowing down and resisting experience. It's a sort of narrowing. And the other one is that you're not settling on experience. The mind's getting sort of dispersed and dissipated. So one's too tight, one's too narrow. So you're just noticing these two currents that move us away from being able to be present to experience. One knows, all right, so the next one's kind of interesting. So you've got contracted, distracted, and then you've got great. And great, the Pali for that is mahagata, which basically means, does it say somewhere? Mahagata means become great. So if your mind has become great, you want to notice that. All right, you want to just sort of clock that it's happened. So Mahagata, it doesn't say much about it in the Satipatthana Sutta, but you get it in other contexts in the Pali Suttas. And there's two contexts where it tends to be used. So you've got this sense of limits being taken away. You're not contracted, you're not distracted. And in those conditions, the mind can become great. And one context that it's used is the dhyanas. So it's the mind starting to move into that dhyana experience. And the other context that it's used is the Brahma Viharas, where you've got this sense of the heart opening. And I'm inclined to kind of want to package both of those in here. I think you're looking for something where the awareness is deepening and the heart's opening. So the sort of boundaries of craving and aversion that limit us, when they're diminished, there's a flowering that starts to happen, this mahagata that can include the dhyanas and can include the Brahma Viharas. Do people work much with the dhyanas these days? I sometimes get the sense that dhyanas have gone out of fashion a bit. It's a bit hard to sort of know how to respond to that, isn't it? Let me just work on the assumption that they have. But one of the things that I've found a bit helpful in this text, I think when I first heard about the dhyanas, and you're getting this very concentrated, one-pointed, blissful state of mind described. And my state of mind pretty much consistently fell short. So it was never a terribly helpful framework for me. But one of the things that I found helpful in this text is that I'm starting to think dhyana is just a collective noun. And it's a collective noun for the specific things that you're working with. In a way, you don't have to attend too much to jhana as a goal. What you want to be working with is whether or not we can consistently attend to experience, and plugging in, just starting to notice when pleasure's there, making room for that in our experience. You're starting to notice that kind of the sukha, that kind of settled, stable state of mind that's able to be available to whatever arises. And that availability is the ekagata, that consistent availability to experience is the equanimity. So if you're just working with things that are experientially important anyway, you're just looking at what's it like to attend to something, to get interested. What's it like to allow ourselves to respond to that in an open-hearted way? If you're working with those factors, you're already working with all the dhyana factors, and a kind of concentrated mental state naturally comes as a consequence of us just working with how we attend to experience. So the dhyana kind of looks after itself if you're working with those factors. And in a way, you don't need to worry too much about what level you're on. All you really need practically to do is to think, what's the next step? How does the awareness go a bit deeper? How do we respond to this a bit more emotionally, responsively, a bit more available to experience? And if you're aware of what the next step looks like, you're setting a momentum in process that in a way is practically all you need to attend to. I think that's not too presumptuous. And that brings us on maybe to the next couple of bits. Sorry, let me find my own text. Surpassable mind to be surpassable, and an unsurpassable mind to be unsurpassable. What would that look like in your practice, do you think? Anybody want to have a guess at that one? And this one's not a technical term. I think we're just looking at pretty much what the English is saying. All right, I wouldn't leave you squirming, but I think pragmatically, all it means is it possible to engage with this a bit more deeply? And it's almost like just a real practical instruction in any step of the practice. So you're starting to attend to the breath. And basically, the question is this surpassable? Could we be a little bit more attentive? Could be a bit more absorbed in the experience of the breath? If you're in sukha, same question. Is this surpassable or is it not surpassable? And basically is, what would help me to step into this experience more fully and more deeply? So it's just not quite resting with a kind of superficial engagement with something. It's like in every stage of it, what would it be like to engage with this a bit more deeply and to explore this a bit more deeply? And to go back to the earlier question about dhyana and about anapanasati as a sort of samatha practice, in a way you're not obliged to go there at all. You know, like in a way, if you want to go straight to reflection, you can do that as an intelligent choice. But there's all these little doorways along the way into deeper experience. And I think rather than have a kind of preconception about what's going to be experientially helpful, just one of the questions is, what would it be like to explore this dimension of the practice, whether it's engagement with the breath, engagement with sukha, attending to the nature of the mind, just with any of those, what would support us to step more deeply into that? Does this feel like it's surpassable or unsurpassable. And in that way, you've just got a map for an exploration of deep experience that take you a wee while to exhaust, I think. Concentrated mind to be concentrated, unconcentrated to be unconcentrated. Again, it's a kind of just that sense of whether or not anything's excluded. You know, just you're looking at this unfolding awareness and just noticing where the boundary is. Is there anything that would allow us to include more fully, more deeply, this whole spectrum of experience? So concentrated in that sense, maybe even concentrated in the more technical sense. If you notice the habit of the mind moving away from what it attends to, what's happening? Just what is it that takes us away? What would let us have a more sustained engagement with the experience? And then the sort of last one, liberated and unliberated. And not sure I've got an awful lot to say about this, but again, it's just that sense of, well, even just the comparison, you know, this is sort of occurring to me as I speak, but it's almost like liberation's a direction. And if we move from aversion to something a bit more empathic, we're moving from trapped to something a bit more liberated. If you move into something a bit more meditative and a more intense engagement with something, you're moving from constrained to a bigger space, to something more open. And if you start to notice how some of the deep habits of clinging, of pushing away, set up boundaries in our experience, and if they start to soften, again, just that process of liberation carries on. Now, I remember something Bhante said once that really struck me, saying that he didn't think enlightenment was a static state. If the nature of things is this unfolding process of coming into being and passing, he was saying in his understanding of it, enlightenment has that character as well. It's just a continuing process of opening up to experience with fewer and fewer blocks to it. So that sense of we're setting in motion a process of liberation rather than liberation as a fixed state. And just wherever we start to feel we set up constraints, we set up boundaries, we split our experience, it's starting to look more deeply into what allows the next step of release. So in this state, what we're looking at, the kind of habits of the mind. Traditionally, this is, again, sort of talking about the sort of liberation of dhyana, when the mind is, the strong habits of craving, aversion, distraction, doubt have all gone into some sort of suspension, and you've got the quality of awareness that's left when those are absent. And that sets up the conditions, that kind of deep, integrated, concentrated awareness sets up the conditions that moves on to the next step, which is the examination of dhammas, which we'll look at tomorrow. Do you get the sort of shape of it? You get where the sutta is trying to kind of nudge us towards. Yeah, so we'll leave it there. We'll maybe try to come back